Hey guys, John V here from PhoneArena. Right now you're watching our video review of the Nokia Lumia 1520. You could say that Nokia has been on a rampage of late. They've been non-stop with Windows Phone, and they've been the most vocal company for the platform. And with that, it all culminates to their very first phablet, or tab phone. Now, there are a lot of impressive things with the Lumia 1520 and also some firsts. It's the very first Windows phone to feature a 1080p screen. It's 6 inches, so it's pretty massive. You also have a very modern processor in the Qualcomm Snapdragon 800 CPU. And of course, it wouldn't be a Lumia device if it didn't feature a 20 megapixel pure view camera. So it all culminates to this. How is it going to fare against some of the elites in the space? Let's find out in our review right now. Well, it doesn't stray from the design DNA that we're used to seeing with the Lumia devices, so the 1520 looks very like its siblings. Initially, it looks like a stretched out version of its sibling in the 1020, but the 1520 has some really nice elements to it. It is a large handset due to the size of the display, but at the same time, they managed to really trim the profile of the handset so it's not as thick compared to the 1020 before it. And of course, it's partly due to that large camera sensor in the back. It's a lot more subdued this time around with the camera sensor. At the same time, it still has all the characteristics to make it a Lumia device. It's kind of hard to make it out, but the 1520 has a slight taper design, which is a little bit more prominent around the sides here, but as it goes towards the back, it becomes a little bit more uniform. And again, that contributes to giving it a very thin profile. However, the 1520 is still a massive smartphone. If you're using it with one hand, if you have smaller hands, you're going to be doing a lot of stretching because of how wide it is. At the same time, it doesn't really help when the corners are a little bit sharp to the touch. The construction is just solid with the handset. Now, it employs a unibody polycarbonate plastic casing. Now, the black, white, and yellow versions are all in a matte finish, so it has a really nice, clean appearance. But if you pick up the red version, just note that one is in a glossy finish. It's a little bit more prone to fingerprints and smudges. Overall, the design is appreciable. It's nothing really new or refreshing just because it utilizes some of the same design characteristics that we find on past Lumia devices. But what's nice here is that it continues to have one solid design, a clean finish, and for something so massive, it still has a really nice thin profile. It's something we haven't seen before in the Windows Phone camp, but the Lumia 1520 is being notable for being the first Windows Phone to feature a 1080p resolution display. It measures in 6 inches, so it's really big, and it's an IPS LCD panel with its 1080 by 1920 resolution. It gives it a pixel density count of 368 pixels per inch. Naturally, it's super sharp and detailed. We can make out the display with no issues at all, and with the web browser, even the most minuscule of text, we can make out from a normal viewing distance. At the same time, the panel has a very natural color reproduction. It doesn't seem too overblown or saturated like some AMOLED panels. And being IPS LCD, it has some really nice qualities for it. For example, you can see the wide viewing angles on this device. It just maintains its clarity even at the widest angles, and its brightness output is pretty strong. So when it comes to outdoor visibility, there are no problems whatsoever with this one. A 6-inch screen is hard to miss, and that's the first thing that really stands out with the Lumia 1520. At the end of the day, we're just comforted to know that we finally have a Windows Phone that has 1080p resolution, and of course, being a phablet, the display on here is just beautiful in every way. Below the display, we have the usual trio of capacitive Windows buttons, so they include the back button, the start button, and the Bing search one. Meanwhile, above the screen, we have the narrow earpiece, we have the light and proximity sensors, the AT&T logo, and the front-facing 1.2 megapixel camera. Along the right edge of the phone, we have its physical buttons. We have the volume control, dedicated power button, and the 2-level shutter key. They're a little bit flat this time around, but luckily they still have nice responsive feels when you press them down. The left edge is home to its nano SIM slot and its micro SD card slot. You're going to have to use the included SIM removal tool to actually dislodge them. Now, it makes sense for the SIM card, but it'd been nice if it was just spring-loaded action with the micro SD card slot, just because it provides just easier access to it. Rounding things out, we have the 3.5mm headset jack on the top edge, while at the bottom, we have the micro USB port for charging and data connectivity. In the rear, along the bottom center, we have these micro dots, which actually tucks away its internal speaker. And just like the Lumia 1020, this doesn't feature built-in wireless charging. That's why you have these 3-pin connections here, which is used to work in conjunction with an optional accessory, which gives it that functionality. It's certain to delight many shutterbugs out there. The Lumia 1520 features a 20 megapixel pure view camera, which features a 6-element Zeiss f2.4 aperture lens. You have lossless zoom and optical image stabilization, and you also have dual LED flash on board. So let's quickly talk about the camera. Now, it might not outclass the 1020's camera, but nevertheless, it's still a very capable one. Now, the sensor inside is technically smaller than the Lumia 1020 sensor, but the nice thing about this is that it's not as large. You don't get that hump. It's more uniform and flat, which is great. You also get only 2 times lossless zoom with still images, but you do get up to 4 times with HD video capture. And when you're taking those still images shots, you get a maximum usable resolution of 18 megapixels with 4:3 aspect ratio. And the other cool thing that's worth noting is that it features the ability to capture images in RAW, something that serious photographers that will really appreciate. And lastly, when it comes to HD video, of course 1080p, but you could select from 30, 25, or 24 frames per second. Due to its unibody construction, there's no access to its internal battery, but luckily it's stuffed with 16 gigabytes of internal storage, which is more than adequate, which can also be supplemented by its included microSD card slot. Going beyond the specs, the hardware, and the design of the phone, it's actually running the most up-to-date Windows Phone 8 experience, which is wonderful and all. It's included with the GDR3 update. I'm going to talk about some of the enhancements that we find with this new updated experience. In general, the look and feel of the Windows Phone 8 experience here is pretty much identical to what we've seen in the past. We wouldn't say it's totally new, but it still really stands out for all the cool animations that it has going on. On top of that, the start screen here, which is filled with all the same dynamic live tiles from before. Now with GDR3, we're able to actually accommodate up to 6 of the smaller size live tiles, so the tiny size one. And of course, there's a lot more personalization than when Windows Phone first came out, because now we could resize the live tiles to different sizes, up to 3 if we want to. And as far as the app panel is concerned, it's still in that typical scrollable vertical listing. Even though we see a little bit of an enhancement with the notification system with Windows Phone 8, for the most part, it's still a little bit disorganized just because the majority of them are handled by the live tiles themselves. So if you're looking for a specific one and you have all the live tiles placed in different areas, you're probably going to have to spend some time just looking for each one of them. With the lock screen, though, we have now the ability to select different apps to give us notifications from here, which is pretty nice, but it's still been neat or better if there was just a centralized location that gets everything. Multitasking is handled the same way from before, so you just hold down the back button for a few seconds. You're going to get these mini windows, and from here we could quickly jump in and out of different things very quickly, which is nice. And now with the GDR3 update, we have the ability to actually close down a single application. There are also several new features in play with the GDR3 update, but of course, some of them are more in your face than others. Now with the lock screen that I'm going to first talk about here, we have a glancing clock which tells us the time, so it's not turning on the entire screen, draining more battery. And if we want to wake it up, all we got to do is just double tap it. Secondly, the GDR3 update now allows us the ability to actually lock the screen rotation. So we have the option of disabling or enabling it so it could stay fixed in either portrait or landscape. But unfortunately, it's still something we have to go through the settings menu to access. It's not something that's quickly enabled somewhere else at any time. If you don't want to be distracted while you're driving, you'll really appreciate the new driving mode feature that's available with the GDR3 update. Now with this, it allows us the ability to turn off all notifications except for text and phone calls, but if we wanted to, we could also disable those as well. Now the neat thing about it, if we could also set up text reply, so if in the event that we actually get a phone call or text, it automatically will text them back with this reply. But the thing is, it requires us to connect a Bluetooth device for it to actually set up. Those are just some of the new features enhancements found with the GDR3 update. Like we said, the visual presentation is pretty much intact from before, but it's nice to see those enhancements made to the experience. Beyond that, we also have the ability to actually set different tones for notifications if you wanted to. And it also includes Microsoft Office, so if you're more all about getting work done the road, you'll have the ability to actually compose documents, spreadsheets, or even a PowerPoint presentation all on the go. One area where the platform is lacking compared to its rivals is with its digital voice assistant service. Now with Bing's voice search, it's very limited in what it could provide. It's not as extensive compared to Google Now or even Siri, but at least you have the ability to do basic things like text someone, open up applications, but it's not smart enough to actually tell you what the weather is like outside. With so much real estate to work with, we're naturally greeted with a very spacious on-screen keyboard and very easy on the fingers just because our thumbs are able to encompass the entire layout very easily. It's very responsive too, and it features a great autocorrect feature, so it's pretty fantastic with the experience. And as an alternative, we could also compose messages by speaking them. After this, Windows phones in general no longer need to worry about being underpowered compared to some of those high-end Android smartphones. That's because the Lumia 1020 is packing a very modern processor. It's the quad-core 2.2 GHz Qualcomm Snapdragon 800 processor coupled with the Adreno 330 GPU and 2 GB of RAM. And obviously, the performance is as expected, very snappy. Again, typical of all Windows phones. It's just nice that it's featuring a really modernized processor. Internet Explorer has always been very favorable with all the Windows phones we've checked out in the past, but here with the Lumia 1020, just because we have a ginormous 6-inch display that has 1080p resolution, it just gets better, mainly because of its sharp details, its snappy performance, 4G LTE connectivity for fast page loads. There's just a lot to like about the experience here. Naturally, we're presented with all the Nokia branded applications that we find on other Lumia devices. So you have things like the Here Drive Plus application for turn-by-turn directions. You have a basic Here Maps. You have also for music, the Nokia Music application, which gives us a streaming functionality. We also have the Nokia Creative Studio, which allows us to actually apply different effects to photos that we snap. And we also have other newer things like Nokia Refocus and the Nokia Storyteller. When it comes to playing music, we have two options available to us. We could go with the Nokia Music application, which allows us to play content that's stored locally or even stream, or we could always stick with the default Windows Phone one. They both have a really nice visual presentation, very dynamic looking. And as far as the audio quality from its speaker, it is strong, but it tends to produce some hollow tone sounds. Guaranteed to keep you busy on the road, the handset is awesome when it comes to watching high-definition videos. First, it has a wide array of video codec support out of the box, so XVID, DivX, H.264, MPEG-4, all the popular ones are supported right from the get-go, which is wonderful. And naturally, the large 6-inch display with its beautiful colors, strong contrast, and smooth playback really help the experience. So just like the Lumia 1020 before it, when you press the physical shutter key and hold it down with the Lumia 1520 here, automatically will launch the Nokia ProCam application instead of the default Windows Phone camera app. Now, if you're a hardcore shutterbug, you'll really appreciate what's in tow here just because it presents us with a very similar experience you get on a normal camera. Now, the best thing about it is that we have this interface that's rich with manual controls, so we can adjust things like the white balance, the focus, the ISO, the shutter speed, and even the exposure. However, when it comes to shooting modes, it's not something that you do on the fly while taking the shots. Instead, it's done post with the Creative Studio application. Now with this here, we're able to apply several different things. So we could choose different colors if we want to. And then from here, we could apply things like a focus object or radial tilt shift. So what we do here is we could actually have certain elements be more in focus versus the others. But it would be nice just to have it available directly with the camera app instead of a separate one. Due to the high resolution snapshots it captures, there's a noticeable amount of delay between each shot. So basically when you press down the shutter key for a little bit, automatically will focus pretty quick, but when you take the shot, at least a few seconds before you're going to be able to take the next one. So you might have some missed opportunities. The question that remains now is how does its 20 megapixel PureView camera stack up? Well, just to put it plainly, it's an excellent camera. It definitely competes against some of the elites in this space, but we wouldn't say it's better than the 1020, but still a very capable one at the very least. Now it takes two images, one 5 megapixel count one, the other being the 19 megapixel one. The 5 megapixel one is great for sharing, but the 19 megapixel sample just captures a lot of detail. For example, the Lumia 1520 excels when it comes to taking macro shots. Here's a perfect example here. You get that cool blurring effect with the background, and then a lot of the emphasis is placed on things that are closer to the camera. It has a very good balance between colors, details, and exposure. With exposure, it tends to be right there in the middle, doesn't seem to be too under or overexposed, and it handles dynamic range perfectly as long as there's a good amount of lighting going on. And when it comes to color reproduction, it also produces some very natural tones, not overblown, very realistic, so the entire composition just comes out pretty exquisitely. As for its 1080p high definition video recording quality, we're going to say it's good, but it's not on the same level as its still image quality. That's just mainly because of its flatter looking details. It doesn't look as sharp as we'd like, but there's still some likable elements about it. For example, it has a very quick focus adjustment. Same thing applies with exposure. It doesn't seem to be too jerky. It's more of a gradual thing than anything else. And the color reproduction is right there with a natural looking tone. The other thing is with its audio recording, it's good too, just because the 4 microphones are able to capture everything around us. Though if you're behind the camera, it doesn't seem to emphasize a lot of the audio there, but if you're in front of it, it does a good job, and you could tell the lossless zoom works fantastic. There's no degradation with the quality. Sadly though, we're not particularly impressed with its low lighting performance with 1080p videos. It's worth mentioning you could do it in either 30, 24, or 25 frames per second, whatever you like. Of course, with 24 frames per second, you get that cinematic mode. But going back to lower lighting conditions, the biggest and most distracting part about it is just the amount of noise that just comes up. It's just so prevalent, and it really softens the overall tone of the video. Call quality is nothing more than average here with the Lumia 1520. Now with the earpiece, it produces some very natural and very distinct tones, but the volume output's not the strongest. We have to really press it against our ear to hear our callers. And the other end of our line, our callers mentioned that our voice has a little bit of a crackly tone to it, and when we switch to using the speakerphone, it exhibits some hollow tone voices. With its gigantic size, its high definition 1080p screen, and its beefy processor, it's amazing the type of battery life we're able to get with the Lumia 1520. It's packed with a sizable 3400 milliamp hour battery, and with that, it's able to provide us easily with a day of heavy usage. As we're constantly checking emails, sending text messages, and surfing the web, it's absolutely a device that's going to be long lasting. Okay, so when the Lumia 1520 was first announced, it was given a price point of $200 with a 2-year contract, but as we know now, it's now been lowered to $100 with a 2-year contract. An aggressive stance, no doubt, and something that's very interesting. Let's get the obvious out of the way. The Lumia 1520 is no doubt the best Windows phone to pick up right now. If you're thinking about one, this is it, no questions answered, just because when you think about its price point, the hardware, the specs, the performance, it really shows why it is the Windows phone to own right now. Not everyone's going to be a fan of the gigantic size of the 1520, but when we compare it to some of the elites in the space, like the iPhone 5S, the Samsung Galaxy S4, HTC One Max, LG G2, and even the Note 3, the Lumia 1520 really holds its ground, and when it's priced at $100, it just makes it so more attractive.